how are you?
Good to see you too.
Good to see you here.
Yeah, very nice to see you. Yesterday, the National South Africa invite.
Hei. Hei, hei. Hei, hei. Da blir vi med dere inne, og så venter vi.
Hei, jeg har hendene fulle. Hei.
Og så
skal Leymah Gbowee være rett rundt hjørnet.
ja.
Så vi bare ser på.
Leymah, can I please ask a question? How do you think this movie can benefit your work?
Well, I think the movie helps my.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
The minister is also here and he has to leave.
Martin Luther King, all recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize. She teaches us that nonviolence requires courage, creativity, strategic foresight, leadership, conviction. She also teaches us that nonviolence, seemingly so utopian, is exactly that, but that it can also be the way by which you make the utopian. Welcome. We have just started welcome you, in fact. We're very pleased to have you here. And I was, in fact, reminding the audience, but this is something I should remind you of as well, and that is a screening of the same film we are screening today, 3 years ago in Oslo, at the Oslo Documentary Cinema, with Priyo as a co-host. It was a freezing cold winter day. You were tired after a trip from New York. Parkteatret, the theater where we were screening the film, is a small place, and people are waiting in a line that encircled the whole block. My colleague Helga Hernes, who is in fact sitting beside you right now and will lead the discussion later today, also led the discussion on that occasion. And that occasion, that evening, is still being talked about in Oslo. Your humor, your engagement, your passion warmed the crowd up, and I think you warmed up with it. So a replay should not hurt. We are so glad to have you here, and we are very grateful to you and to all others, of course, that contribute to this event. We are grateful to Focus, the Forum for Women and Development, for their generous cooperation. And I want to remind you of their seminar on Sunday, discussing the likely impact of the Peace Prize. I also want to thank the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their engagement and support on this cause and our research, as well as the Nobel Institute for its collaboration. But we now should turn to, firstly, the main star of this event, Leymah Gbowee, who is, first and foremost, I believe, a peace activist, an organizer, and an innovator in the cause of peace. She is also the woman that has initiated several networks and organizations. The Women in Peacebuilding Program, the West African Network for Peacebuilding, the Women Peace and Security Network Africa, and a number of other initiatives. But now we would like to hear from you. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you all very much, Your Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Kingdom of Norway, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. As he recounted that night in Oslo, the one thing he failed to tell you all was that the seat they had for the panel were bar stools. And I have been so busy working for peace that I never learned how to climb on a bar stool. So people saw me fight, go around, come back up, go around, come back up. And finally I said, shoot, can I just have a chair? It's great being here. I'm honored to be here. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen the film. But what I would like for you to take from this film, even as you sit and watch, is that I learned something from the ambassador for the UN in Côte d'Ivoire. He says there are two things that are in play in countries that are in conflict: the myth versus the reality. And the myth is most often what people think people in conflict contexts are going through. And most times decisions are taken based on a myth. The reality is most often never featured. This film, Pray the Devil Back to Hell, and the subsequent documentaries made by Abby Disney and Jenny Rediker and Pam Hogan has done something. It busted the myth. The myth of women in Africa and other parts of the world being victims, idle bystanders, people who never move and just sit and are continuously raped, continuously abused, and continuously watch their children die. The reality of women living in conflict contexts is that these are the people who keep societies together when the men have lost their minds. These are the people who keep the children, who nurture these children to the point that when the war ends, you still find a whole population of young men who will say to you, I am never getting involved in war, because their mothers continuously and constantly reminded them during wartime that the best way to ever engage a problem is through nonviolence. The images the Western media, the national media, and the local media portray of women is usually those images that reinforces the myth. This film challenges you to look behind the shootings when they're doing coverage of war. And behind those shootings, you will see women carrying food and carrying babies on their back, or you will see women walking with old people. Those are the realities, that these are the ones who keep society going, even in the worst madness. The situation that we lived in Liberia from 1989 up until 2003 was no different. Yes, you had the situation of rape and abuse and wars and anger and pain and everything, but you also had a whole community of women who refused to allow the pains of the war to make them give up. These were women like myself who woke up every morning and walked 3, 4, 5 hours to look for leaves to come back and boil for their children to eat. These were women who, even as they went through these ordeals, sometimes were raped, but came back with a brave face and never told anyone in their communities what had happened to them, because they felt they had to keep their communities together. These are the same women after the war today in our countries working to help young women to understand their values, help young men to understand that war is never an option. And these are the same women who are contributing their quota to peace and development in Liberia and other parts of the world. This film should not just be seen as, wow, this is what the women has done, but it should also challenge you that even as you live in a quote-unquote peaceful country, you should look in your backyard, look in your front way, and ask yourself, what can I do to contribute to greater peace in this world? often you hear people say, I want to come to Africa to assist. And Leymah, how can I assist? And then the question I ask them, do you have underprivileged communities in your community? And they say yes. Do you have immigrants living in your community? And they say yes. So why don't you start small? Because there is this new saying, or it's an old saying, using the local to contribute to the global. As you interact with some migrant child who has a myth that because my mother wears a headscarf in this country, she's an outcast. As you interact with that child who, quote unquote, may be a prospective recruit for some unnecessary activity, you make that person understand that this is a beautiful world and I don't have to be at the extreme to contribute to this world. So how can we all serve as ambassadors for peace, ambassadors for reconciliation, ambassadors for making this world a better place? So as you watch the film, please take notes, look around, step out there and say what it is that we can do. Personally, I have my job caught up for me. It's always been tough, but it's even tougher now. Two things are interacting at once. One, being a Nobel laureate. Before, I would just say anything I felt like saying and did not worry about the consequences. Until someone told me a few days ago, Leymah, now that you are a laureate, whatever you say becomes an instant quote. So you have to be very careful. So now, before I say to someone, I think you're evil, I have to read the dictionary and really try to put it in a nicer tone because I don't want to be quoted as saying. The second thing is that a few weeks ago, the president of Liberia asked me to lead the National Reconciliation Initiative. And if you know of Liberia, you will know that this is a deeply divided country. The elections over the last few days, months, showed us that we need to step up. We have serious issues, and reconciliation, like peace, is not just, doesn't have a theoretical recipe. It has to be engaged and approached context to context. In Liberia, for some communities, reconciliation is a job for the youth. In Liberia, for some community, reconciliation is finding a space for women to talk the stories about their abuse. In Liberia, for some people, reconciliation is having to do what they want to do at the time they feel like doing it. So this is a huge challenge. But I think I'm up to the task. Yesterday, someone said to me, when you said you were 39, someone whispered, don't you think she's younger than that? Because that energy that she carries around is like a 25-year-old. I wish I was 25. But by the grace of God, with the help of all of our friends and partners, and with the prayers of some of you in this room, if not all of you, we will meet those challenges head on, like we did when we were advocating for peace, as you see in the film. Because doing some of the work that we do is not an option, it's not a day's job, it's what determines whether our children will live to be 40, 45, or 50. So as you engage with the film, as you engage with people here, please remember it's up to each and every one of us to make this world a better place. To the women of Norway and from all of the different communities represented in this room, I'd like to say to you, this Nobel Peace Prize is not just mine, it is ours. We work for it. Whether we know it or not, know that it's ours and we should carry it high. Don't think it's an African or an Arab thing. It's our thing as women. Congratulations, women. Thank you.
thank you for those words of wisdom. Words of very practical wisdom, I would say. And we look forward to hear more of you in the course of the next few days. The next speaker is Jonas Gahr Støre, who is the Foreign Minister of Norway. He has a remarkable career, has been working as a researcher, as a civil servant, as a civil society activist, if I may, and in all of those functions has certainly been engaged with women issues and gender issues. He's very engaged in the topic that's on the agenda today. He attended less than a week ago the Bonn conference on Afghanistan's future, where amongst other things he said, women have to participate in determining Afghanistan's future in politics, in all sectors of society, as in all other countries. Basic universal rights, including the right to education, must be respected. And that is an important and very timely reminder when it comes to Afghanistan at the current, but it does not apply to Afghanistan only. Foreign Minister, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for this introduction, and thank you for allowing me to be present at this start of the Nobel weekend. And it was good to be inspired by the Laureate, so we all feel a bit geared up at the end of the Friday. It's really a great thing. Well, you are now going to go to the movies, and it will probably be one of the most paradoxical and moving Disney movies you ever saw, I would say. Since it's Christmas, we are waiting for Disney movies, but this one is very special. Pray the Devil Back to Hell by Abigail Disney is the remarkable story of this remarkable woman we just saw, and her resolve to bring peace to Liberia. I guess when that film was made, little did she know that she would today be a world-known person through the Nobel Prize. All the stronger is the film. Her story is one of a woman whose courage and optimism exceeded that of most people. And I think we saw a glimpse on that tremendous force today. She decided that she could bring and would bring an end to tremendous suffering of her people, take on the Charles Taylor regime and the warlords, and lay the foundations for peace in her war-torn country. And let me say, the methods she used were not out of any textbook. It came out of a woman's experience and a deep knowledge of how it was all about to mobilize a social movement. A pregnant young woman with 2 small children, she decided that enough was enough, and that the future of her children and the children of Liberia, and now we hear the children of the world, had to be saved. So she went out to do it. Not all who have had the same courage have managed, but I think her achievement really stands as an inspiration for all who have tried and may try the same endeavor. This is a story of remarkable strength and courage, both of Leymah Gbowee and of the women who joined her from all walks of life and a wide range of religious backgrounds. It is a story of social mobilization, which I think we politicians are wise to study very carefully, because it is an important force for change. It's about their will and ability to promote reconciliation, and she will have important tasks for that, as we now hear, in the months ahead, and to build a new future on the ruins of a brutal war. So it is a story, I believe, that brings hope and inspiration. One can sense it from women and children all around the world, but I may also add for a considerable amount of men who seek inspiration in that courage. Those who fight for peace and democracy across the world. It shows what one woman can do, which is all the more impressive because women can come in these settings from more pressured situations. But again, it's also an inspiration to men, and to young men, what it takes to see a society as a whole. We now live in the midst of an Arab Spring, which is turning into autumn and heading for winter in some places. It's demonstrating that there is enormous power in people coming together in non-violent protest. What we really are seeing, I believe, for the first time in this part of the world, is a bottom-up process of change. It's dangerous to say that something happens for the first time in history, but I really think this is the true meaning of that broad movement. Something is happening bottom-up, aided by technology, courage and will, and there are authoritarian rulers in all corners of the world today pondering on this, fearing what may happen close to them and for good reason. So, the story of Leymah Gbowee, and now a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, little did she know about that when she set out on her course, is a testimony to the potential of women in other parts of the world. As we talk about 1325, and everybody in the room knows what that is all about, it's a fine text on a piece of paper worth nothing until it is translated into reality in all different sets. The way we think peace and reconciliation, the way we rebuild after war, the way we include. It is from a point of proportionality stupid to exclude half of the population if you want to achieve something. But it is also from the perspective of wisdom a bad thing not to include critical experience on how you solve conflicts and how you build solid structures for your future house. This gives recognition to the women around the world now in the Arab Spring, in Africa, who are struggling for their rightful roles in the transition process, and just as Christian reminded us, to the tremendous women of Afghanistan who fear for their future, but now mobilize also to make a difference. This story is also a reminder for me and for governments around the world to seek the real agents of peace and look behind the formal channels and beyond the media spotlight. Now, women tend not to always be in that spotlight. During this weekend in Oslo, they indeed will, and we will build on that. So, dear friends, as Mr. Berg-Harpviken reminded us, we were pleased to welcome Leymah Gbowee here in Oslo in the past. She was a speaker at the Oslo Forum that I arranged back in June, where she addressed peace mediators from all around the world. They got a lesson, I can tell you. She explained how the international community had helped to increase the power of the warlords during the negotiations in Liberia, paradox, while failing to give legitimacy to the role of women. By not including women in the talks, the mediators were not only disempowering women, half of the population, but were missing out on local perspectives, experience critical for any lasting peace. So I'm convinced that the more inclusive processes will lead to more robust agreements, and incorporating the views of this critical experience of those who do not carry guns will increase the chances for achieving sustainable peace. This was my theme, as Christian reminded us when I talked about Afghanistan a few days ago in Bonn. In fact, if there's one criterion which will have ripple effects and determine the future of Afghanistan, it's the way you deal with the role of women. Formally, through constitution, legal arrangements, and also practically in the daily reality in local communities throughout that country. We will continue as a government, and that's our, the only thing we can pledge on behalf of this country, to look for concrete ways to give voice to women and enhance their visibility in all the peace and transition processes in which Norway is involved. As in Liberia, women, activists, and peaceful agents of change are present, and they are active in all countries. They have to be seen, included, and we have to pave the way for their inclusion. So the question is, of course, why don't we hear more about women like Leymah Gbowee? I think this weekend will remind us that if we look carefully, we will find them, and we should give them provenance. Films like this are needed to draw attention to the stories of these extraordinary women. The Nobel Peace Prize is a good way of showing the relevance of these extraordinary women. And this film that you're about to see is a powerful medium. Images are more powerful than words, so films have the potential to reach far wider audiences than many political statements. Let me also welcome the head and brave woman leading UN Women, President Bachelet, who has shown in her own country what it could mean to the proudness of her people that somebody having gone through tremendous testing of her own life was able to come at the helm of that country. And we now count Chile as a stable democracy that is a proud partner for countries around the world. And to have you, Madam President, to lead this UN agency, I think is a great start. And as I told you, we pledge to support you in all your activities and are very happy to have this close communication. We are also proud, let me end by saying, by supporting Abigail Disney's new film project, Women, War and Peace, which focuses on women's peace-building efforts across the world. So we have to enlarge and go out and see the ripple effects. I'm sure that a number of the women featured would be worthy candidates for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think we will take the word of the laureate this year that her prize is really a prize for all of them. I wish you a moving afternoon and a good weekend in Oslo. Thank you for your attention.
Minister. We move on to the next speaker, who is indeed Michelle Bachelet. She is the Under-Secretary General and the Executive Director of UN Women. Not only is she that, she is the first ever of the sort since 2010. She's also a former president of Chile, where she also served not only as a president, but in various minister posts, including that of defense and that of health. And if you think about what the Nobel Peace Prize laureate told us earlier today about not only looking abroad, but also looking at issues of justice and political participation at home, I think it's particularly timely in this situation of financial recession in Europe to remind ourselves of what Michelle Bachelet did as a president of Chile, where her response to the financial crisis was the prioritizing of pension reforms, of social protection programs for women and children, and indeed of initiatives for research and development. Not only for women, but indeed for the benefit of women also. Michelle Bachelet, it's a pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, I'm really happy to be here in this possibility, in this little ceremony, in the opening of this screen of this extraordinary film today. As you all know, Pray the Devil Back to Hell documents this catalytic role that Liberian women played in accelerating and finalizing this, I would say, agonizingly slow process, peace process, that finally brought an end of 14 years of war. The film, of course, also highlights fantastic women like we just heard, the bravery of many individual women peace champions, including Leymah Gbowee, who we're all honoring here in Oslo as one of the winners of this prestigious Nobel Peace Prize. I think Leymah's achievements and those of all the Liberian women peace activists simply, I think, takes one's breath away. I know what it means to confront powerful people. I come from a country that we also had, we lost peace and we are in conflict. I know also what the courage that requires to be able to confront that situations. But I don't think many of us truly knows the terrors that Liberian women endured, resisted, and survived. And I think our respect and awe goes out to them. But I think it was so important to hear Leymah, because Leymah not only represents that, and she's always said, and in the film is very well reflected, that women are not victims, they are fighters. And she was mentioned here once and once again, and I truly believe that. Women are really always in conflict and war, disproportionately affected, either by violence, gender-based violence, rapes, either by massive displacement. But women are also a so essential part of the peace building, the peacemaking, of the peace processes. And as she also shared with us, and it's our experience in our country and in the Arab world where we have been very involved as UN Women, peace is not a process that ends the day a peace settlement is signed. Peace and reconciliation is a process that takes much longer. It means to deal with so many different pains and injury that society has to live after this so terrible situation. So, and I think Leymah is the best person to deal with this because she has this fantastic global perspective, but on the other hand, something that women have. They can be very pragmatic in thinking What's the real, because we have to deal with food security every day, we have to feed our families, we have to ensure that they have access to health, to education, how we deal with, how we achieve our dreams, but on the other hand, ensuring daily basis with better conditions for women and men. I think there are other heroes we should honor here, because around the world, and I really believe, and the first time I heard of these fantastic winners, I've always said how important it is, because women, peace and security is an issue that it's already 11 years that we have the resolution 1325. A lot has been progress, but still, so little group of women have been able to be part of the peace agreement. So few women have been able to reshape their societies. So I think that the strong message that the Nobel Committee sends to the world is women care, women can make a difference, and as Focus Campaign is saying, there's no peace without women. Some of these great women who has fought and struggled so courageously to bring peace are here today, and I salute you. Finally, we also need to acknowledge the perseverance and creativity, first of all, of women, and I think that's something extraordinary, because you're going to see in the film that they didn't use exactly the usual and traditional ways to get to peace. And I think that's fantastic, because many times when you're dealing with a very complicated issue, traditional ways clearly don't send the right message and don't have the right outcomes. But we also want to acknowledge the creativity and perseverance of the filmmakers themselves. We all know that a picture says 1,000 words, and a moving picture says so much more. I'm sure that you are aware of the fact that this film has had a phenomenal impact around the world. But most importantly than that, it has inspired and empowered women who are themselves in situations of great risk and danger to build coalitions and to speak out against oppression. Abigail Disney, Jeannie Retiker, and Pamela Hogan, your film has changed the thinking about women and peace building. It has inspired so many people. Your work has advanced the cause of building a gender-just peace everywhere. And I leave you now to watch the film. I know you will be shocked, amazed, moved, and motivated to do what we have to do, to redouble our efforts to contribute to peace and democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are now moving on to the film. Enough talk.
Let me just say, I'm Helga Hannes, and I will have a short conversation with Abigail Disney and Ginny Rediker, who have made this movie. It is Abigail who is the producer, and Jenny who is the director. This film had its premiere at the Trivika Film Festival 2008. Ginny Rediker is director of this movie. She's an Emmy, has won an Emmy Award, and she has won other awards as well. And she continues to direct and produce films together. Now, let me ask you, Abigail, what inspired you to produce this movie?
Is the mic working? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I went to Liberia in 2006 for my first time, right after President Sirleaf had been inaugurated, with Swanee Hunt and a group of women who were just there to see if there was some way we could be supportive of President Sirleaf's presidency. And while I was there, people kept mentioning things to me about sitting on the airfield for a really long time and long strikes, but I had never really heard exactly what they meant. So I asked around and asked around and asked around, and I realized there was this incredible story. And I went home thinking this would make a really great film, but mainly I just went home angry, because I didn't already know the story. I just thought, if I pay attention and I know what's going on in the world, how did no one think this was worthy of making sure we knew it? And then Ginny and I reconnected after a long space in our friendship, and it just seemed like we had to make the film.
Well, Ginny, I want to ask you, what is it like to make a movie in a war-torn country? What is it like to get women to talk about their horrendous experiences? Are they willing to share their memories?
Well, actually, we didn't film during the course of the war because we heard the story afterwards, and so there's a couple things. Is that once to tell you the truth, I also had never heard of the story, and when Abby said to me, I think something really incredible happened in Liberia, I said, no, but all the papers have talked about all the women who are being raped and all these horrible things that are happening, and I don't think I can spend the amount of time it takes to make a film just talking about all the victimization of women. And then Leymah Gbowee came to the UN, and Swanee actually called us and said, you gotta meet her. And we went over, we met Leymah, and I thought, oh my God, this is a film we could definitely, because it was a story of what women did to resist. And so, but I still wasn't 100% sure that it really happened. So we went on a fact-finding mission in December of 2006. And so it was not long after Ellen Sirleaf had been inaugurated. We got about 30 women together to tell their stories so we could figure out, I really need to figure out exactly what had happened and who we should have in the film. And so as the women sat around and told me their story, it was just one would talk after the other, and they were still, they were incredibly willing to tell the story because no one had listened to them. In fact, one of the hardest things about making the film was that while it was incredibly easy to get the war footage, it was incredibly difficult to find the footage of the women. I even had a journalist say to me, oh yeah, we saw those women in the field, but they were so depressing looking that we didn't film them. And so that if we hadn't been able to find the footage of the women, their story would have gone untold. So that in fact, they were incredibly willing to tell their story. And the most difficult thing was to find the footage. And that we found it everywhere. The footage of them in the church, when you have where Asatu is saying that she was going to take it up to the Muslim woman, that was on some tape buried in the church, and that there was the last fraction of the tape before the tape ran out, where Asatu said that. The footage of the women when they confront Charles Taylor was actually, we found that with a guy who was working for Charles Taylor, who had been Charles Taylor official videographer. And when he had been fired, and he had taken all the footage with him, and he had that buried someplace. And the footage of the women in Ghana circling the hall, that we got from somebody who worked for Ghana Television, who just remembered where that one tape that hadn't been filmed over was. And so really the biggest thing was finding the footage of the women. And so the story wouldn't, without it, we couldn't have ever told their story.
Now, you two have decided, or you have continued to work together. You have made this television series, which the ministers spoke about. And I was thinking, Abigail, perhaps you could reflect a little bit about your thoughts about film as a medium for social change. Because I know that you have done a great many other things before you went into filmmaking, and then you reconnected with an old friend who is a film director.
Yeah.
But what do you think about films we are researchers, and we have a very, very hard time reaching out ever. We do work with some journalists, but you know, I think it is such a fantastic idea, and you have reflected so much about it. Can you share with us?
Well, I mean, before this film, I had a long academic life, and then I did my work with various foundations and little NGOs and so forth, and all I wanted to do was try to, you know, be a good person and make the world a better place. And I have to say, once this film came out, I thought, what have I been doing all this time? Because I could see how a whole room would kind of shift just at the 72 minutes. And it's extraordinary. I mean, when you think about the fact that when the lights go out and you're here in the dark, and it's just light and sound, that's all it is, organized, you know, into moments and scenes. And you do kind of forget who you are, and you're just absorbed. It's almost like a dream state, you know, what a film can be. And I think that our hearts really do open in watching a film in a way that they don't. for any other kind of medium. And I saw it happen again and again and again in various countries with women who were really different. I mean, our first audience was in Bosnia. And, you know, I was expecting Eastern European women to kind of say, oh, well, that's Africa, that's nothing, that has nothing to do with us. And they didn't at all. What they said was, oh my God, that looks so familiar. And I recognized my cousin so-and-so, and, you know, gosh, maybe we should have tried this. And then it shifted very quickly into a very pragmatic discussion about what was going on in the town and what they could shift and what they could change and when they should meet next week and should they write a position statement. We had 20 different position statements come out of screenings of these films around the world. It's now been in 60 countries, all 7 continents. So I can't even begin to put into words, especially standing here in Oslo on this particular occasion, how much more than I could ever have possibly allowed myself to hope for this film accomplished, and in terms of social change, in terms of moving people's hearts.
Well, it has inspired women, as you say, all over the world.
Yeah.
And when you were here last showing the film, as the minister said, or I think it was you, Christian, said, there were so many people, and I, being what we call an old feminist, which means I'm ancient, I saw so many younger faces. I saw women under the age of 30, 32, 35, being cramped into this very small theater that we then had. And I really had hope, again, that perhaps social movements will. And I think you must have experienced that when you've traveled around the world. I think actually what is very admirable about you too is not only have you made the movie and the series that you have now made, which you can tell us a little bit about, but you travel with it. And I wonder what your reaction is to being together with people who see the movie for the first time, and then to share their experience, to work it, to learn new lessons. What is it like for you?
Well, I mean, it's incredibly gratifying, and I think what's also incredible, we've also traveled, I have to say, with the film with Leymah in places all over the world. And, you know, we've been from places like Palestine and Israel in the same day, playing it in both sides of that conflict, and seen amazingly different reactions, where in Palestine people immediately started, like Abby said, identifying with, trying to figure out what they could do. And we had a very different reaction in Israel, where there was like, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder when, you know, will Leymah run for office? I mean, it was a very strange experience. We've seen women inspired. Also, I think to me, from talking about working at home, we showed this film in Philadelphia, which is has a lot of trouble with violence and youth violence. And it was shown by a group of women called Mothers in Charge, and each of them had lost a son or a daughter to gun violence. They came together. There was a screening of 500 people. They had Muslims and Christians, and they had united their communities around this to then begin to see what they could do to stop the violence in their community. They successfully closed a gun store that was illegally selling weapons to young people without license. I mean, so I've seen the film have the ability to really bring people together, inspire people, and to give people the courage to stand up to what they want. I mean, so it's incredibly gratifying. And as you say, it did inspire us to make this whole other series, because we realized that what we saw in Liberia was happening to women all over the world. And so we, for broadcast television in the United States, it was just on in October, we did a film where we showed what was happening to the women who are fighting to have a place at the table in Afghanistan, what had happened to women in Bosnia, the women who are fighting against displacement in Colombia, and kind of a general picture of how it all comes together. So this has been a complete and total journey for us too.
So now you've already given us a little introduction. Perhaps you can say a little more about.
I should add that I'm just here. Actually, I flew here from Sri Lanka, and I was just showing in Colombo the Afghanistan film. And you know, I've always had an anxiety that, you know, Pray the Devil Back to Hell would be just this sort of magic film, and nothing else would ever quite have that impact on audiences. And so, but the leaders of this group didn't feel they could show a film where the president of a country is hauled off to the international court in Sri Lanka. So they decided to show the Afghan film instead. And interestingly, that we had an audience of Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and Christians, and we had women and politicians and activists and all kinds of people there. And it went along similar lines. We had, I can't tell you how gratifying that is. So we had a period of time where the women talked about what they saw of themselves in these Afghan women, and then it pivoted, as it always does, into a really pragmatic discussion about how to do the work of reconciliation in Sri Lanka, and how to make women visible in a culture where they tend not to really be taken all that seriously. So it was incredibly gratifying to see the way the film works on similar lines. The Women, War and Peace is a collection of 5 films. Pray the Devil Back to Hell is 1 film. There's a film about Afghanistan called Peace Unveiled. There's a film about Colombia called The War We Are Living. There's a film about Bosnia called I Came to Testify. And then there's a film that's an overview of why do we care about women in war? War is just a man thing, right? Who cares what happens to women? But they're right at the center of it. They've been underestimated always. We've missed the story, but now they're more at the center than they've ever been before. And there are these movements around the world that we've never made visible. And so the 5 together have this extraordinary power, because it's tempting to say, oh, well, that was just Liberia. But once you see them all together and you start to understand the way wars do tend to share certain qualities, and that women do tend to stand up in certain kinds of ways, and when their agency is addressed and respected, the outcomes can be wildly different. I think that that's really powerful. And so viewed as a whole, the 5 films really do make it a really interesting case, not only about women's agency, but the nature of violence and nonviolence themselves. So we're really very proud. We're really hoping to get those out really broadly. I hope here in Norway and around the world.
We just have to say one, I just have to add one thing, that actually the government of Norway was incredibly generous and was one of the main supporters of the Women, War and Peace project. And so we're very grateful to Norway also.
But we still have a little bit of work to do, and the gender team at PREO has decided to mobilize the Norwegian broadcasting system to show these 5 films. And we hope that we will write to all of you and ask you to help us, to convince them. Because I think we've had a wonderful afternoon, but we want to have some wonderful evenings with your movies. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.